It all began on a cold, snowy New Year's Eve. I had driven up to the old family cabin deep in the woods of Vermont to spend the holiday alone. The cabin had been in my family for generations, but I hadn't visited it in years. I thought it would be a good escape from the chaos of the city, a quiet place to reflect on the past year and plan for the next. Little did I know this trip would change everything. The drive had been uneventful until the final stretch. The snow had started falling heavier, and the road, barely visible under the thick white blanket, twisted and turned through the dense forest. My car skidded a few times, and the silence of the woods seemed oppressive. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had set, leaving only the faint glow of my headlights to pierce the darkness. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered it, a rustic wooden structure with a pitched roof, nestled among towering pine trees. I parked the car and trudged through the snow to the front door, my breath visible in the frigid air. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside and flicked on the lights. The old chandelier hummed to life, casting a warm golden glow over the familiar interior. It felt comforting at first, until I noticed the fireplace. Someone had recently used it. The ashes were fresh, and a faint smell of burnt wood lingered in the air. My family hadn't been here in years, and I hadn't told anyone about my plans. A shiver ran down my spine, but I convinced myself that it must have been a hunter or a lost traveler seeking shelter. The woods were vast, and the cabin was the only structure for miles. After unpacking my things, I lit the fireplace and poured myself a glass of wine. I tried to relax, but the feeling of unease lingered. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the shadows cast by the fire danced on the walls like sinister figures. I kept glancing at the front door, half expecting it to burst open. Around midnight, as the clock struck 12, I decided to call it a night. I climbed the creaky stairs to the bedroom and crawled into the old wooden bed. The mattress was firm, and the blankets smelled faintly of mothballs. Exhausted from the drive, I drifted off to sleep, despite the unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. I awoke to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The steps were soft but deliberate, moving across the wooden floor downstairs. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen. I strained my ears, hoping to convince myself it was just the wind or an animal. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair being dragged across the floor. Gathering my courage, I slipped out of bed and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. I tiptoed to the top of the stairs, my breath shallow and my hands trembling. The firelight from downstairs flickered faintly, illuminating the main room. I could see the back of a figure hunched over the dining table. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, its head tilted slightly as if listening. Summoning every ounce of bravery, I descended the stairs slowly, the poker clutched tightly in my hand. As I approached, the figure's features came into focus. It was a man, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wrong. They were sunken, devoid of life, yet somehow fixated on me. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. His lips barely moved, and his words sent a chill down my spine. "This is my cabin," I replied, trying to sound assertive. "You need to leave." He didn't respond. Instead, he slowly stood up, his movements unnatural, almost mechanical. Then he turned to face me fully, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. His chest was stained with blood, a deep gash running from his collarbone to his stomach. Yet he stood there as if nothing was wrong, staring at me with those hollow eyes. I took a step back, my heart pounding. "I'm calling the police," I said, fumbling for my phone. But when I looked back up, he was gone. The chair where he had been sitting was empty, and the room was eerily silent. I spun around, searching for any sign of him, but the cabin was empty. Panicked, I bolted the door and checked every window. They were all locked. I tried calling for help, but my phone had no signal. The storm outside had worsened, and the howling wind seemed to mock my desperation. The rest of the night was a blur of fear. I stayed awake, clutching the poker, my eyes darting to every shadow. The man didn't return, but the sense of being watched never left me. When morning finally came, I decided to leave. I packed my things hastily and stepped outside, only to find that the snow had buried my car up to the windows. There was no way I could drive out. Resigned, I decided to wait for the storm to pass and spent the day trying to calm my nerves. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard it again, the footsteps. This time they were upstairs. Terrified, I grabbed the poker and slowly made my way up the stairs. The sound led me to the bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, and a faint light spilled out into the corridor. My hand shook as I pushed the door open, revealing a sight that will haunt me forever. The man was sitting on the bed, holding a small ornate box. His lifeless eyes met mine, and he smiled. "You should have left," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. Before I could react, the box opened, and a deafening roar filled the room. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew icy cold. Shadows poured out of the box, swirling around me like a living storm. I screamed, dropping the poker, and tried to run, but the shadows enveloped me, pulling me into a suffocating darkness. When I awoke, I was lying in the snow outside the cabin. The storm had passed, and the morning sun was blindingly bright. My car was clear of snow, as if someone had dug it out for me. Shaking, I climbed into the car and drove away without looking back. I've never returned to the cabin. Every New Year's Eve since, I've dreamed of that man and the box, and every time I wake up feeling like a piece of me is still trapped there in the darkness.